This just tells you how dumb short-term predictions are for anyone, even if you trust my nonsense over here. When I go on the record and say I guarantee this stock's going down, I didn't assign a time frame to it, and it goes up 25% in the next week, that's Skippy has some egg on his face here.
This podcast contains the arguably witty banter of two friends, Skippy and Douglas, that like to debate about investing. The content is intended to be entertaining and for informational purposes only, not investment advice. You should do your own research and consult a financial professional before using any of the information in this podcast, and especially before investing.
I can't believe we're making it happen here. The plan was to take the week off, but Skippy couldn't hold back.
I just had to say hi. I mean, if you go back to our early episodes, Douglas goes on about this is a couple friends who like investing and happen to be successful investors that like to pick each other's brains, man.
Where you at? Tell the people where you at.
Well, I can't reveal too much. I'm in Europe in an alley at one of my favorite pubs in the world, talking to the people, talking to Douglas.
I love it, man. I'm glad we got to chat. I'm glad we got to chat. Your dedication knows no bounds. I'll tell you that much.
There's some real live reporting that has to happen over here. That will happen later in the episode. But I got inflation report, construction report, all this good stuff.
Oh, right? Oh my goodness. Okay. All right. Then this is emergency pod. I didn't realize. But I think where we probably have to start is continuing the conversation we started last week around Nvidia, because I mean, you spit on it, because I would not have guessed that what happened this week was about to happen.
First of all, we have to clear up Douglas' lame joke there, because Douglas is always doing jokes from 2 years ago. When he says Nvidia, it's some crazy Ross Gerber. Who is this guy? Some crazy guy
I can't remember.
Went on yelling about Nvidia. We're talking about Nvidia here. Nvidia, a stock last week that was trading at 28 times price to sales, and this week I think is at 35. Douglas, I went in. Remember we talked about. I went on the record and said this stock is going down. Well, not only did that not happen, it went up $80 a share from 300 to 380. And I knew earnings was coming out this week. I was pretty fired up that maybe if they had a solid earnings, I might be able to economically take a bet against the stock. Well, the stock went up more than my wildest dreams, like a 25% gain midweek. I'm still not able to get in to bet against this thing as much as I would like to. And if you don't listen to the show much, you should never do that. It's a dumb idea. But we're playing around with some ideas here for fun.
I mean, it's so out of control. It's so freaking out of control. As you were just saying last week, you were saying the stock is so wildly expensive. And by the way, when you said the stock's going down, you didn't say the stock's going down in the next week. That's not the kind of games you play. You're saying that.
No, long term. But exactly. At the same point, Douglas, when I go on the record, this just tells you how dumb short-term predictions are for anyone, even if you trust my nonsense over here. When I go on the record and say I guarantee this stock's going down, I didn't assign a time frame to it, and it goes up 25% in the next week, that's Skippy has some egg on his face here.
Do you know what I'm gonna go on the record and say, do you know what the number one sign that something is in a bubble is?
I don't.
When I read like no fewer than I think 10 articles this week that said that Nvidia was not in a bubble. That's the number one sign. There were so many articles that it would start off by something like Nvidia's out of control, but it's not a bubble, right? So when you have to state that something is not a bubble, God help me, it's a bubble. I tell you that much right now.
Yeah, we talked about the comparisons to Cisco in '99 last week.
Yes.
And you pulled up the article that said like Cisco is the one stock you have to own, even though it's the most expensive stock in the world. People are writing the same articles with Nvidia right now.
There was this Wall Street Journal piece that I read about is the AI hype overall, but mostly was talking about Nvidia. And as I kept getting deeper into this thing, it was saying that people should feel reassured because even though the rally is concentrated, which we're going to talk a little bit more about the S&P 500 and its concentration right now, even though the rally is concentrated, it's mostly concentrated in quote unquote established blue chip stocks. So we're good. What? Like I was kind of like, it's kind of like what? And then it went on. I actually wrote this quote down because I thought this was genius. It says, what you're getting with these stocks is pristine balance sheets, stable earnings growth, mostly reasonable valuations, and you have an AI kicker.
No, what you're getting with these stocks is a whole bunch of garbage because their valuations have run away. No one said Cisco in 1999 was a bad business. It was a bad stock to own. That's what
Yes.
you're getting with some of this other garbage.
There was this other quote that I thought was great in there that said, there's simply not enough, and you say versions of this before, there simply is not enough market cap available to support the buying mania for artificial intelligence. Now,
I
technically,
love that quote.
yeah, it's so good because technically, like market cap is infinite. And when you start running like the multiples, you go like at a certain point, something's got to give because the US can't be 100% of the global market cap, as we talked about before. Oh, it's phenomenal. I'm loving it. I'm loving
Hey,
it.
listen, market cap is only infinite if we have certain political leaders in power just
Mm,
printing money like crazy.
yeah, it's a true story. It's a true story. Can we talk?
Otherwise, yeah, go ahead.
I was going to say, can we talk about some of the S&P 500 concentration?
We need to. This is part of
Mm.
the Nvidia story in a way.
Yeah, I was running some numbers because you sent me over this tweet, which I really enjoyed the chart that was saying that the top seven, or maybe not the top, but seven of the top performers this year. So Nvidia, Tesla, Microsoft, Apple, Amazon, Google. If you look at their returns, something like 44%, I think is what the chart said. And if you look at the other 493 stocks in the S&P 500, up 1%. So I just went, I got to back this up. I got to back this chart up. So of course I started pulling digits. I was looking at numbers this morning. And if I took the top 10 stocks, I pulled year-to-date return, their starting weight at the beginning of the year, so I could get a sense for like what's the weighted return. If I pulled the top 10, which are basically those stocks that I named, plus a couple others, we're looking at a very positive return. If I pull the rest, we're down, I think it was 3%. Let me just check this. I'm going to run this right quick. Hold on. Let me tell top 10. If I pull these out.
Well, while
Yeah.
you're doing that, let me give a caveat. So, if you don't know how most S&P 500 funds work, this might be a surprise to you because basically we're going to tell you that 10 stocks out of 500 really, really matter. That's because most of those index funds are going to be market cap weighted, which means the biggest companies, the companies like Apple, which has a $2.7 trillion market cap, hold the large majority of that index. So you can get to the point, I don't know these numbers off the top of my head, Diggles, but where like 10 stocks control a significant portion of the market. And it just happens that year to date 2023, those largest stocks are also the best performing stocks. So they're
Yes.
really skewing the index.
Yeah, that's right. And the numbers I'm about to spout, I mean, these are numbers I ran this morning, so they're not going to be exactly right, but just take it directionally, similar to the 493 thing we were talking about. So what I'm looking at right now is the top 10 stocks were about 11% is the return they provided. The overall S&P 500 so far this year is up about 10%. So that means the rest of the stocks have lost 1% in aggregate. It's fascinating. And I'm just talking about the weightings here too. So Apple and Microsoft are the top two weightings of the S&P 500. So those are the largest percentage of the market cap of the S&P 500. And between the two of them, you're talking about 14% of the index. The overall value of the index, 14% of them rest in those two stocks.
It's too much. Again, to tie it back, if maybe you're not following by now, what that means is if you're not a fan of Apple and you are just an index fund investor, like a Boglehead, you say you don't want to invest in Apple or Microsoft. If you invest in SPY, 14% of your money is in Apple and Microsoft. Like it's so huge. And for the last decade, really, those stocks have performed so well that they've protected you from that. No one's going to complain about owning those stocks in the past decade, but they can't last forever because the market cap of those things is absolutely crazy.
Yeah, it reminds me of a couple years ago when I wanted to invest in emerging markets. So I bought an emerging market fund, or I was looking at buying an emerging market fund. I ended up buying it. But when I looked at the breakdown of it, it was something like 35% of the index was China. And so I had to buy other like country specific emerging markets funds because I'm effectively just buying China here, which like I'm good with that, but I had to buy like some more India, some more Korea just to try and, get the thing balanced. It is, whew, it's really fascinating. I think it's super fascinating. And I was looking, there was this chart that I can never pronounce this right, but I think his name's Charlie Blelo. You know what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
Um,
Yep.
put out, and it was looking at, it was over the last, I think 20 or maybe 30 years. I think it might have been 30 years. It was looking at what was the number one, like the percent makeup of the S&P 500 for the top stock, like over that period of time. And Apple is the highest of all time, according to the data, right, that Charlie had. It was the most concentrated. But you had something like in the early 90s, I mean, the highest, the number one stock had something like 2 or 3% of the index. So it was less than half of what Apple is right now. We're concentrated, people. It's going to be a fun ride.
Well, and that's if you way overthink it like me and you do, and you've been on the index fund kick. Well, if you go, we know US stocks are expensive. That's not a great thing. And then if you're not bullish on Apple and Microsoft, it gets really hard to be excited about buying the S&P 500 because it's effectively everything that's expensive. I mean, sure, no, some of the stocks from 400 to 500 might be cheap, but they're like 0.01% of the index. They don't matter for your returns at all.
Exactly. Yeah, loving it. It's concentrated. It's going to be an interesting ride. What else do you want to talk about?
Quick inflation report from the other side of the pond here.
Okay, kick it off.
Food is cheap, like cheap.
Yes.
I mean, foot long Subway, €6, like 6.50, I think. I mean, back in the homeland, it's running north of $10 for me. So even
you remember the $5 foot long? Do you remember the $5 foot long?
Oh, I longingly. I also remember the 29-cent soft tacos at Taco Bell, like way back.
Come on, simmer
drinks are cheap. Like basically everything in the grocery store appears to be dirt cheap. Gasoline, transportation costs look like they've gone up a little bit. But over here, man, I know the inflation numbers say that inflation in Europe is actually greater than inflation in the States right now. It doesn't feel like it. It doesn't feel like it's hit yet.
Yeah, maybe it just hit in different areas, like things like natural gas, like stuff that is how stuff runs more so than typical consumer stuff. I don't know, but that's interesting.
Oh, there's definitely some of that. So I do have real time reporting talking about $1,000 a month energy bills through the winter. That was crazy. So there's all in all is going on, but it's funny to be on the other side of the pond and in a way feel like the U.S. has gotten, I don't know, hit harder on the inflation bug. It's totally anecdotal. Like there's no real data here, but the real life experiences are fun. And I've been surprised by how cheap things feel.
Yeah, I felt the same way when I was in Portugal a couple of months ago. Very similar feeling that it feels like going back, I don't know, 7 or 8 years in the US price wise.
Yeah. The other thing that's really interesting is construction boom like crazy. I mean, just cranes, it's like probably 35 cranes within 3 miles of where I'm currently sitting. So definitely housing costs have gone up, and that's feels like boom time over here.
That's interesting. All right, I'm gonna this is a non-investing thing. I'm gonna convert us to. I'm gonna build off the food concept though and talk about Korean food because I found this post to be really interesting. This is the hustle, which we talked about before. I think we used to hit on some hustle articles maybe like a year or so ago, but it's been a minute. The hustle put out this piece about South Korea. When I mention Korea in the next few minutes, I'm talking about South Korea specifically. How South Korea invested in its global brand via food over the last about 15 years. So back in 2002, The Economist coined this term gastro diplomacy, which is how do you use your food to influence your own brand and perception around the world. In the late 2000s, Korea was doing some awesome stuff. They was like, look, we got Samsung, right? We got all sorts of, we got Hyundai. So they said we push a lot of our own culture out into the world, but it's not recognized. Japan is cannibalizing what we're doing. And in fact, there's this, I don't know how you pronounce this, but it's the Anhalt GfK Roper Nations Brand Index, something like that. This is an indicator of a country's popularity for investment and travel. And Korea was ranked 33rd out of the 50 countries back in 2009. And so they said, we got to change this. And the president launched a $40 million global food campaign. I would not have
Love
thought
it.
about using food in this way.
No, so that piece is so brilliant. And I only got to skim this article, but this is brilliant beyond all regard. And the return on investment here is absolutely insane. Like it's so smart. I think, was it this article or a different one I consumed that talks about Thailand too?
Yeah.
And the reason there's so many Thai restaurants in the US is because the government will back some pretty large loan for
Yeah.
any Thai family that wants to head to the US and start off a restaurant. It's part of the branding initiative.
Yep. Making it a lot easier. It was mentioned in here. It could have been, you might have seen that somewhere else too, but it was mentioned in here. And it's been, so again, like I said, about 15 years. From a ranking perspective, South Korea has gone from that 33rd mark up to 23rd, that's a sizable movement. And you also get things, here's the part that kind of got to me, because there are like a number of non-food residuals that come out of this. So Korean beauty products are much more prevalent now. You get like Squid Game, right? The popular Netflix show. You get Parasite winning Academy Awards, that movie. You get BTS, right? K-pop takes over the world. And so Korea starts to hit on a number of factors and like perception wise around the world. And there was this poll in 2018, according to this post, that said 88% of US residents were satisfied with Korean food, but only 63% of them realized it was Korean. And that's part of what they're trying to fight against here too, is you may love that Samsung TV, but do you realize that that's a Korean television, right? Like they want to make sure that you recognize Korea. So still got some work to do, but I thought it was really fascinating. Like the ingenuity to go about there, like have a kimchi onslaught upon the world. And then two, it's having an impact.
Such an amazing concept. Forced language here, but I feel like food is the gateway drug to recognition, to travel, to all those things. Like how often have you been like, oh, I really like this aspect of someone's culture? And how often is that tied to food? And then that opens you up to other ideas and the potential to be more comfortable with like their religions, their whatever it is. I just thought this was brilliant. I don't know how the hustle came up with this idea even, but I love that they covered it.
They're pretty creative in what they do. And what you just said is true, even if you look within the US, right? Like when folks are like, oh, we're going to Kansas City, they think about barbecue. Like that's automatically what starts to kick in. And it does make people start to, the perception of the place that you're going to changes, better or worse, right?
I mean, well, the last piece on this is kind of like, I think about stereotypes, and we can bring it back to investing, but stereotypes are sometimes good, sometimes bad, but stereotypes become PR and that public relations. Like if you're aware of the stereotypes that are in place and you can craft them and help tell a story around that, it's just huge. So I don't know why, to be honest, the US isn't doing something like this. And it's probably because we tend to be arrogant, but it's a great outreach. I hope more countries recognize the power that could be made here with fairly limited investment to improve their brand throughout the world. I'm going to have to hit the road here shortly. Anything else in your fishbowl?
The last thing I got back on the investing front is to mention something you sent over to me, which was the survey of showing by age group how people feel like they can manage their investments relative to an institution or an investment professional.
Oh, I loved this one.
This survey, and I don't know who was behind the survey because I couldn't find a link to the survey itself, so I'll just talk to the charts, but I would love to give credit where credit's due. It was at least put out by Michael Fink. So they asked 2,500 people. It seems like 3 questions, or maybe those 2 questions, and then they kind of put the 2 together. So one is like, how much do you feel like you can manage your investments more effectively in an institution or investment professional? And it was under, the age categories are under 35, 35 to 45, and then each up by 10 until you get to 75 plus. And it is just negatively correlative. As the older that you get, exponentially, you feel like you can manage your investments less effectively than an institution or investment professional. So for people under 35, 66% of them said that they feel like they can manage their own investments. So there's that. Then what gets even more interesting, the second, I don't know if it was a question, but the second category that the breakdown they had is they tested investment literacy. So this is a bit different than the financial literacy we talked about last week. I don't know exactly what the questions are, but they they said a couple examples are like, do you understand diversification? Do you know what a Roth IRA was? Those are a couple examples they gave. And again, the correlation is the exact opposite of the last one. So here, under 35 years old, 38% of people were investment literate. Can I put those two things together for you for a sec?
Please. Yeah, I mean,
okay.
It's fascinating.
Once they broke down the investment literacy, they broke it into five different levels. So there's 0 is like not investment literate, and a score of 4. So 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. A score of 4 means that you are the most investment literate. And if you look at how investment literate someone is versus how much they believe that they can invest better than an investment professional, you get what you'd expect based on the other answers we have. So 75% of the people that were in the 0 investment literate category said that they feel they can manage their money best on their own. This is Dunning-Kruger gone wild up in here.
It really is. I know we've been teasing a premium episode, but this is one of the things I want to do a deep dive on the premium episode. You and I are both really odd ducks in that we think that we can beat index funds, and we have a track record of beating index funds, right? But there's even more to it than that, because sometimes spending all that time and energy to research exactly what you're going to buy, even if you think you can beat the index funds, ends up being counterproductive in a sense that it requires a lot of thought to actually buy the investments that you want to make.
Yeah.
It's not a thoughtless, I can buy every 2 weeks or whatever. So in some cases, I think even if you're in that rare camp that you and I both feel like we are, that doesn't necessarily mean that you end up with more money at the end of 40 years, because when you place that money becomes another part of the equation that's hard to pull off.
Exactly.
There's just a lot going on here, but I would say the main thing is just look at these charts, regardless of what age you are, right? If you're 20 or 60, just look at these charts, because they tell such an incredible story if you can follow the trend. Like if you're fairly numerate and you understand exactly what's happening here, it's a fascinating, incredibly well done piece of work.
So fascinating. Love it. I just loved it. Thanks for sending that over. I know you got to run, man. So short episode today, but I'm glad we got to talk. I got to get my own like investment juju out there with you. So thank you for making the time in the pub.
This is fun. I hope the audio was good enough. We'll call it.
Yeah.
And I'll see you next week, buddy.
Thanks, everybody.